We're here on BBC One after Question Time.
Question Time travels all over the UK, and tonight we've come to the North Wales coastal town of Llandudno. This seaside town is said to be the inspiration for Lewis Carroll and his creation of Alice in Wonderland, but there's a fascinating real-life political story unfolding all over Wales, as both Plaid Cymru and Reform's polling suggests Labour's century-long domination here is under serious threat from both parties. And our audience members arriving here this evening, as with every other week, reflect the wide range of political views and voting record across the nation. Tonight, that's Wales. And they want to ask about the political situation here in Wales as well as nationally. Why are small boat crossings so high? And that 20-mile-per-hour speed limit in Wales, is it such a good idea? Welcome to Question Time from Llandudno. On tonight's panel from the UK Labour government is Alex Davies-Jones, the MP for Pontypridd, that is a minister in the Justice Department with specific responsibility for victims and violence against women and girls. Such was his devotion to politics from a young age. Darren Millar chaired his local Young Conservatives when he was just 15. Now, just a little bit older, he leads the 16 Conservative members of the Welsh Parliament, or Senedd. Llinos Medi is from Plaid Cymru, or the Party of Wales. She was homeless with 2 children just 10 years ago and is now one of her party's 4 MPs. Annabel Denham is a columnist and deputy editor on the opinion desk at the Telegraph. In a recent article, she wrote that only a 21st century version of Thatcherism can fix the UK. And Mark Serwotka is a trade unionist to his bones. He was General Secretary of the Public and Commercial Services Union for 24 years and backed Jeremy Corbyn when he was Labour leader. Good evening. Welcome to Llandudno. Welcome to our panel. Welcome to our audience. Very nice to see you here. And, of course, welcome to you at home. Sit back. Let's get the questions started. Our first one tonight is from John Agnew.
With Labour support in Wales plummeting amidst policy reversals and rise in Plaid Cymru and Reform UK popularity, how can they regain public trust? So
the picture's changing here, according to the polls in Wales. Labour has dominated in Wales for pretty much a century. And what's happening here is reflecting the picture nationally, which is popularity, support for Labour is dropping, support for other parties is rising. In Wales, Reform and Plaid Cymru. How do you regain that trust that is clearly hemorrhaging from Labour at the moment?
It's about delivering for the public, Fiona, whether that's here in Wales, John, whether that's here in every part of the United Kingdom. You know, when we came into power in Westminster just under a year ago, we said it wasn't going to be easy. You know, repairing 14 years of decimation to our public services all over the place was going to be difficult. But as the party of devolution, you know, I'm proud to be a Welsh Labour Member of Parliament, and as the party of devolution, having seen the biggest injection of funding to Wales from Westminster since devolution began, actually seeing the impact that that is having, whether that is the huge investment in our NHS here in Wales and across the UK, bringing down waiting lists, making sure that people who are waiting, are suffering in pain, these are real people, not just numbers, are actually getting that service that they need, showing how having Labour governments at both ends of the M4 working in that partnership in power can deliver for everyone. Now,
when you talk about delivering, Labour has been in power here since time immemorial, pretty much. So you could have delivered, but it looks, according to the support you're getting, it looks like people don't trust you anymore. They don't believe in it.
And having to do that with the backdrop of really chronic underfunding of our services, whether that is our railway investment, our NHS, our public services. But look at what we are doing. So
it's all Westminster's fault?
No, it's not all Westminster's fault, but we do have to recognise that that is where the majority of our funding has come from. And what we have delivered in Wales, in spite of that funding, building new schools in Wales, delivering on free school meals in Wales, what we've announced in England today, we've already got here in Wales, free prescriptions in Wales. There is no tax on being ill. You know, it's ensuring that our public services are protected, ensuring that we've got that adequate schools investment. All of that is happening.
Talking about schools, you can't be proud of the record of schools here in Wales. Ranking so low on the PISA rankings, which is the international ranking of schools. Wales is doing very poorly.
I'm proud that we're investing in our education in Wales, you know, building those new schools, those 21st century schools.
Are you proud of the educational record, though?
I'm proud that
the
we are delivering
where it is in the
schools.
rankings?
And what we're doing is actually seeing that in practice, making sure that we've got that investment coming forward so that every child has the opportunity. I want children in my own constituency of Pontypridd and everywhere to ensure that they've got those opportunities.
Llinos.
Yeah, well, I think listening to you now, it's unfortunate that history, your promise of change hasn't happened for us in Wales. Labour promised change and that we would benefit from both Labour in Cardiff and Labour in London, and it hasn't happened. Recently, have you heard this week, Cambridge and Oxford is now in Wales. There's this rail infrastructure in Cambridge and it's a Welsh and England project. HS2, the funding to Wales. In 2022, the Secretary of State for Wales, Joe Stevens, agreed with Plaid Cymru. It was 4.6 billion we owed in Wales. She becomes now the Welsh, our Secretary of State, and she can't stand up for us.
Can we just understand that a minute? Because I don't understand that.
Yeah.
So and I know you'll all be aware of this,
yeah.
So the Oxford-Cambridge transport link that's going to be put in comes under English and Welsh funding. What's it got to do with Wales?
Yeah, so it comes out of the same reserved pot of money that upgrades to, for example, Cardiff train station is classed as an England and Wales project. So that is where it is. This is a reserved sort of pot of money that comes to both England and Wales from the Westminster government. But what we have seen, and that is a fact in terms of how that funding model works, but what we have seen is Joe Stevens actually recognising the chronic underfunding that our railways in Wales have had. And we've got the spending review next week. I think we need to not get ahead of ourselves to see what could be coming.
Let Llinos continue.
And to continue, our resources in Wales, the Crown Estate, something that's devolved to Scotland. Scotland get the profits from their Crown Estate, from their natural resources. I put forward an amendment in Westminster. No Welsh Labour MP came through that voting lobby with me to get what's rightly ours to put back into our communities. And on top of that, these decisions around the winter fuel payments, PIP, the PIP will impact Wales dramatically. We are a poorer nation. And thank you for asking the question around education. I was a council leader for 7 years. I looked at the budget and the struggle to keep education at where it was. And there was lack of recognition that we weren't investing in our young people, that we weren't giving them the opportunities. I want Welsh children to achieve across the world. And for them to be able to achieve, we need to invest in them, invest in it. Not saying, oh, we've given them a good building, but we can't give them the best in the classroom. Okay. That's where it should be.
So, Labour possibly feels that it's got its Welsh votes in the bag regardless in Westminster, and the Tories possibly feel that they're not going to win a plurality or a majority of votes in Wales anyway. So possibly is it time to look at a third party like Plaid Cymru in Wales?
Well, let's just, I mean, polling can change. But the latest polling, voting intention for voting in the Senedd, and those big elections are going to be next year, put Plaid Cymru first, followed by Reform, then Labour, Conservatives behind them as well. It's a big change at the moment. Let's see if that continues. That's just one poll. Woman here in the red top.
Education is definitely not being improved in Wales. As a mother and a governor at my son's school, and friends with school teachers, the only things that we're facing at the moment is bigger classes and redundancies. What is being done by Labour to tackle that? And
where, I mean, it's a year away, but where would you see, if you don't mind me asking, your vote going next year? Not Labour by the sounds of it.
Well, no. To be honest, I was going to vote Labour, but I happened to be away in the election and didn't do my postal vote in time. And you know what? I'm glad.
OK. Let's hear the woman in front in the green top.
I'm a lifelong Labour supporter, and they're definitely losing my support with a lot of the policies that they're bringing in at the moment.
Do you mean nationally?
Nationally, yeah, but specifically the DWP taking, reducing the benefits to people with disabilities. And I've heard a lot about how it's supposedly going to get disabled people back into work. I'm a parent of 2 disabled adults who have spent their life trying to get into work, never mind back into work. And I'm absolutely disgusted by Labour's policy against them, and no information about the schemes that are supposed to be in place to support people to get back into work or into work in the first place.
Man here in the cap.
I voted Labour on the last election. I voted for change. What I'm seeing now is more of the same. I'm not seeing any commitments that seem to be policy-driven. It seems to be totally transactional. I think that's a word that's used overseas quite a bit. But there doesn't seem to be a plan. I don't see anything going forward that makes me think Sir Keir Starmer has got the ship going forward.
Mark.
So, to be clear, the years of Tory government were desperate for most people in this country. They crashed the economy. We saw a rise in poverty, wage stagnation, no more building of council houses, chronic problems in this country. And Labour won the election by a landslide in seats, although not in terms of proportion of the vote. And to say that this Labour government has been the most desperate disappointment and is letting it down its core communities in Wales and the UK is an understatement of the year. Why I think this is so serious is because I remember when Tony Blair won the election. And when we were unhappy that Tony Blair was moving into the centre, we could see that the Labour strategists took the view that our core vote has nowhere else to go and we can move as right-wing as we want. But now they're seeing that people do think they can go somewhere else, and tragically that is to reform. Now, I have no doubt a reform government would be desperately divisive and dangerous in this country. These are clever politicians. Richard Tice, the deputy leader, is reportedly worth 40 million. I don't believe he cares about people on welfare, on benefits, or workers in Port Talbot Steelworks. But they say they are, and people are so disillusioned with the centre ground of politics, reform are surging in the polls. And apart from the fact that the Tories have collapsed, I think there is another central reason. And it is because of Labour's abandonment of its core principles and working class communities. And let me use this as an example. Allegedly, Labour found a £20 billion black hole. I don't believe that for a minute. In the election, the IFS made it clear every single day the main parties were ducking the issue of the problems this country faced. But if you believe them, they found a £20 billion black hole. They had a decision to make on that day they found it. And the answer that they gave to that problem revealed everything you need to know. To fill the £20 billion black hole, they could have had a wealth tax. They could have put up corporation tax. They could have chased those who had the most. But they attacked pensioners, they attacked disabled people, and they attacked parents who have more than 2 children who are on benefits. And if your solution to our problems is to attack the most vulnerable, the poorest, the disabled, rather than those who can afford to pay, it tells you the direction of travel. And here's the thing. When people lobbied Rachel Reeves about the winter funeral payment, she was not for turning. When she was lobbied on the 2-child benefit policy, she was not for turning. But when she was lobbied by the non-DOMs, the rich people avoiding paying the tax, what did she say? They make a strong argument, and I've changed my mind. Why do the rich people convince Rachel Reeves, but the poor and the vulnerable and the people who are suffering never get it?
Mark, let me ask you. So the people here in this audience will have a decision to make next year, which is how they're going to vote in the Senedd. You clearly have been a Labour supporter, I imagine, for all your life. After what you've just said, would you recommend here to people that they vote Labour next year?
No. What I would say is that there is a crisis in our politics at the moment. We have a PR system. The threat of reform is huge. But I could not knock on a door and tell people to vote to take money off pensioners, attack the disabled, and to turn their back on their core constituencies. Okay. So my appeal, and I make this genuinely, is because of the crisis in politics. And ask yourself this question, does anyone believe the politicians of today, back in 1946, 1947, would have founded the NHS? They are not up to it. They'd have said, we can't afford it, it's too idealistic. The politicians of today need to grasp radical solutions, privatise the water companies, invest in our communities.
I presume you mean nationalise.
I mean nationalise, sorry, the water companies. And to say to councils and NHS trusts, who are sacking workers at the moment to pay their debts, we will not ask you to cut back on public services. We will write off your debts in the way we've done to the banks. 12 years after the financial crash. One rule for the rich, one rule for everyone else.
Let me bring in the rest of the panel. So, Labour, I mean, more people in this audience will have voted Labour than for any other single party, but we've even got Labour voters giving Labour a kicking tonight. Not necessarily all of you, but certainly the ones that I have randomly picked out. Darren, I'm sure you will want to join in, but let's just point out the Conservatives lost all 12 of their Welsh Westminster seats in the 2024 election. And you, at the moment, it can change, it's just one poll, but you are polling beneath Plaid, Reform and Labour.
We had a challenging result last July. But the question, of course, that was asked was about why Labour support...
Sort of smattering of laughter there.
Why Labour support has actually plummeted. And the reason that Labour support has plummeted is because we've had a failing Labour government propped up by Plaid Cymru and propped up by the Liberal Democrats for 26 years in Wales, and they have delivered the worst NHS waiting lists in the United Kingdom, the lowest wages in the United Kingdom, and the poorest educational outcomes. That is their record, and unfortunately, they are now beginning to see that the chickens are coming home to roost for them. I see this as an opportunity because, of course, there is a place for a different path that will bring lower taxes, more efficient public services, get to grips with the challenges that we have in our health service by declaring a health emergency and delivering the improvements that everybody wants to see. And, of course, compounding the problem here in Wales for Labour is not just their legacy after 26 years, but it's the fact that since July of last year, we've seen inflation go up, borrowing go up, taxes go up, and everybody's getting less and less in return. That is not a record that people should be proud of, and that's why I think you'll see a big change in those polls over the next 12 months, particularly when people realise that here in Wales, it's not just Labour to blame for these failures, but it's also Plaid Cymru and the Liberal Democrats too.
Annabel.
Well, Alex talked about delivery, and I'm just going to add a few things to Darren's list here. GDP per capita in Wales is now over £1,000 lower than it was before the pandemic. Productivity in Wales is the lowest of any region in the UK. It has an employment rate 6 percentage points below the UK average. And it isn't just that, it's the money that has been wasted on the pet schemes of some of Welsh Labour's politicians. 20-mile-an-hour speed limits, absolutely, a universal basic income, adding 35 members to the Senedd, and there have been 36 members to the Senedd. And there have been damaging policies, including clobbering holiday homeowners, for instance. So it's become this laboratory for some of the worst policies which have been foisted on the British public ever. But, of course, the general sense of disillusionment is not unique to Wales, even though it may be felt more acutely here. So back to Alex's point on delivery. What has Labour given us? Well, it promised that it would look after farmers, and then it's imposed inheritance tax on farmland. It promised that it wouldn't raise taxes on working people, only to increase employer national insurance contributions by £25 billion in the October budget, which Rachel Reeves herself has previously described as a jobs tax. There's been the fiasco with the winter fuel payment. Keir Starmer promised to smash the gangs, and yet we've had a record number of illegal migrants coming across the Channel in 2025. Now, the only thing I would say as a caveat to all of this is that many voters in response will feel as though perhaps reform is the panacea, to which I would say they have an awful lot of work to do to convince me. They need to professionalise, they need a policy unit, they need managers. They've got a mountain to climb. And ditto with Plaid Cymru. I still haven't had a satisfactory answer to how it is that they can, in good conscience, be in favour of independence when they haven't answered how they would address the social and welfare bill.
OK, let me come around a bit more of our audience. So, where have we got here? There's two men at the back with their hands up. Let's hear from the one in the... I think you've got a blue cardi or jacket on or something. Yes.
The point that seemed to have got missed from the panel was from Llinos when she mentioned the offshore wind resources, the wind farms we've got just outside of the studio where we are here, and the massive amount of natural resources that we have in Wales that Wales has very little benefit from. If our NHS and education system is in such dire straits due to funding, why cannot we be allowed to use our own natural resources instead of pumping it across the border into England in one way or another?
OK, and the man next to you?
So I think all of the political parties represented here are missing something, and I think Reform is too. I think, yes, social care, education, these are really, really important things. But we're talking about lowering taxes at the same time and keeping taxes the same at the same time. I think a healthy, vibrant economy is what supports education. A healthy and vibrant economy is what supports all of those other things that we really care about. So I don't understand why there is this propensity to want to reduce tax. A healthy society needs to tax its individuals, and especially those at 40, 50% tax rates, could easily put 1% on that rate. And I believe that is the answer. Not tax cutting, not cuts, but actually spending. I believe that's the answer.
Alex, let me come back to you, because there has been a lot of criticism coming Labour's way, and I need to give you a chance to respond to that. I mean, for example, the point that you made about disability benefits and the cut to personal independence payments.
Yeah. Look, we never said it was going to be easy when we came in having to look at how we funded public services that have been chronically underfunded for 14 years. It's looking at making those difficult decisions to rebalance the books, make sure that our spending was sustainable and was fit for purpose. It's looking at how we can actually make sure that those with the broadest shoulders do pay the highest burdens by going after the non-doms, which we did do, taxing private jets, going after the energy companies, but also looking at how we make sure that we have public services fit for the future. It's about boosting our economy. You mentioned looking at economy and our offshore wind programmes. If we had devolved the Crown Estate, focused on constitutional issues, which Plaid Cymru want us to focus on, rather than actually getting on with the job of ensuring we've got renewable energy, those programmes, those projects would have been at risk of collapse. That's thousands of jobs in Wales that we weren't willing to risk. That is what was on the table, and that's what's important.
OK. I'm going to end it here, because we've spent already 20 minutes, and I'm aware that I want to get some more questions in. I know we could talk about this for longer. So let me move on. I just want to tell you where we're going to be next week, which is in Fleetwood in Lancashire, a town I happen to know well. So if you'd like to come and be part of the audience, apply to the Question Time website, follow the instructions. Then the week after that, we're doing something a bit different. I just want to tell you about that quickly. So we'll be in Greenford in West London. That's the 19th of June. And we are devoting the whole programme to growing up in the 21st century. We're going to be talking about social media, phones, AI, mental health, jobs, housing. So in the audience, we would like plenty of the young, Gen Z, call it what you like, and also, of course, the not so young. But that's what the programme is going to be devoted to. On our panel, we will have usual Labour and Conservatives, but also Jack Thorne, who's the writer of Adolescence, that hugely successful Netflix drama, and also Catherine Burblesing, who has earned herself a title as the strictest headmistress in Britain. Should be quite a programme. So if you'd like to be part of it, if you count yourself as part of those people growing up in the 21st century, or they're not so young and you've got an opinion on it, or you've got kids, we would love you to come along. So that's the 19th of June. Instructions are all on the website. OK, enough of a plug. Right, next, Neil Pickering. Where are you? Excellent.
Is better weather the reason for the huge uplift in illegal immigrants crossing the Channel? Or is it because we do not have a viable deterrent?
So small boat crossings are 42% higher than at this point in the year last year. And very good weather, and we have had lots of good weather, is certainly one of the reasons that Labour has pointed to as being part of the reason. Or is it because, as you say, we do not have a viable deterrent? Darren.
We don't have a viable deterrent. We had one with the previous UK government's Rwanda plan, and that is why Channel crossings were down by a third.
Darren, let me just ask you,
in that year.
Why do you think when you say that, not everyone's laughing, but a lot of people laughed at that? Why do you think that is?
The reality is, when you look at the figures, the Channel crossings, because of the Rwanda plan, went down.
No,
there were complaints. There were complaints. There were complaints from other nations that immigrants were turning up in those nations. In Ireland, for example, because there was the deterrent in place in the United Kingdom. But let's look at this in the round, OK? There are too many people coming to the United Kingdom illegally. Anyone that arrives illegally, along with other foreign criminals, should be deported from the United Kingdom. That's what people want to see. We want to see immigration down, foreign criminals deported, and we want to stop those greedy immigration lawyers who use and abuse our legal system to keep people in our country that shouldn't be here. That's the reality. And Keir Starmer said he would smash the gangs. The only things he's smashed are the records in terms of the number of people crossing the Channel. We've got to put an end to this, and that's why I believe that we need another deterrent, such as the Rwanda plan, to be resurrected. And in fact, even Keir Starmer himself is looking at processing in a third country now people offshore, away from the United Kingdom, in terms of their asylum claims, which I think is a better approach than all of the facts that he, opposed with the previous UK government. And of course, every step of the way, Sir Keir Starmer and the rest of the Labour Party, along with Plaid Cymru and the Liberal Democrats, were voting against the measures to deal with this problem. That's why we're in this mess now, and that's why those channel crossings are up.
Of course, it's worth remembering that no asylum seekers actually did go to Rwanda.
You wasted 700
It was the fact that the Rwanda scheme was there that was a deterrent. That's the point I was making.
So, Alex,
that is why those figures came down.
Alex, we've got the Labour government saying it's about the weather.
No one's blaming the weather. No one.
Well, they are.
No one is blaming the weather. The people to blame here are the criminal gangs, that infrastructure that has been allowed to build up to allow people to exploit vulnerable individuals and conduct these heinous crimes. So you've got Darren here saying Rwanda was a deterrent. I know you don't agree with that. No,
what is Labour's deterrent?
Right. So what we're doing is actual serious, credible action. So currently going through Parliament right now is the Borders Bill, which would give our national security, forces that counter-terrorism style operation to be able to go after these individuals. And just recently, in the last 2 weeks, we've seen that in action, going after Syrian criminals, going after Turkish criminals. 2 people here in Wales were arrested and charged with smuggling people, dismantling those gangs, going after the people, not wasting £700 million of taxpayers' money on gimmicks. They didn't. From the moment you proposed that your Tory government proposed that.
Why the number of boat crossings, people coming across the Channel going up so dramatically?
Because we need to get in and dismantle that. We need those powers. That bill is going through right now, but it's also ensuring that we work diplomatically with international partners, working with Germany, France, Iraq, Balkans, looking at how we do this collaboratively. This isn't going to work with gimmicks and performative politics, which is what the Rwanda plan exactly was.
Annabel.
Well, we talked earlier about this sense of disenfranchisement that the electorate has with the established parties. And part of the problem is that for a long time, the Conservatives promised that they would tackle this problem. Then we had Keir Starmer coming in and insisting that he was going to smash the gangs and that would reduce the number of people who are making this crossing. And yet we've had about 15,000 come across already this year, nearly 1,200 just in a single day. And I think that the public are so fed up with the lawlessness of it. They're tired of seeing people getting into these boats and some drowning before they've even really set sail from northern France, and yet they're waved on their way to come to Dover. They're tired of the fact that just 5 people, for instance, were convicted in the first 3 months of this year for piloting those boats, a tiny proportion, and of the number of people who are involved in this dreadful trade. And the real issue is, to Darren's point, we have to have a credible deterrent. Unfortunately, it doesn't matter what Labour do on the supply side. They can talk about smashing the gangs all they like. It isn't going to work. It's not going to work this year. It's not going to work next year. And why is that? It's because the profits, unfortunately, are absolutely enormous. It does not cost very much to buy some dinghy that you can cram 65 migrants into at thousands of pounds per head. And so if you smash one gang, another will come up and arrive in its place. The only thing that we can do is make it very clear to people who come here illegally that they will not be able to stay, that they will be returned to their country of origin, or they will be deported to a third country where they can be processed. But that, unfortunately, is the only way that we're going to fix this problem.
OK. Man in the check shirt, over the glasses.
Is this just not another case of Keir Starmer sort of like losing total trust in the nation. On a number of occasions, he's gone on about how when he was head of the CPS, he was instrumental in smashing the gangs then. But when you actually read about those cases and the people that actually dealt with the gangs, Keir Starmer had absolutely nothing to do with it at all. So he's not really the right person to say, I'm going to smash the gangs.
OK. What a woman behind you with the red headband, yeah.
Hi. Darren, is the reason that Plaid Cymru, Labour and the Lib Dems all voted against Rwanda because it was unlawful and against the Human Rights Act?
Man in the grey sweater, yeah. Yeah.
We talk about a deterrent and smashing the gangs, but the final point from the panel was about actually having a safe third country to process people who want to enter the country. There are a lot of immigrants who have no safe route into this country and therefore have no choice, they feel, but to go via these gangs. So it's not just about trying to deter people from entering the country, but a deterrent for the gangs in that there is no criminal trade to engage in.
And just let anyone who wants to come?
Not necessarily, but provide a route by which anyone who wants to come into the country can be processed and can be processed humanely and essentially disrupt the criminal trade. If there is a route by which people can come into this country safely, or at least have the option to enter this country safely, we can have a say on that as long as we do so humanely, safely. Rwanda wasn't humane. It was judged to be not humane. Another country, another system. We need to disrupt the criminal element of it.
Llinos.
Yeah, can we just treat immigration and immigrants as people? I think it's really important what you said. These are people that are making those journeys. And if anybody along this table had a brother or a father or a son that had to make that journey, they wouldn't discuss them in the way they discuss them at times. And I'm fed up of seeing it as a way of being populist. Illegal immigrants, we need a policy to deal with it. We need a policy as well to make sure that they don't put their lives at risk to make any journey. We wouldn't want anybody to put their lives at risk to come to a safe nation. What we should have is a way of going to the source of issue. The foreign aid budget is a way of going and dealing with issues in countries where people don't feel like they have to flee war, where they have to flee a nation where they have no opportunities.
But the foreign aid budget is not going to stop wars necessarily.
We should be putting our time and efforts going to the source of the issues and seeing what we can do to stop any journey and working with those nations in a humane way to make sure, and also have a conversation that immigration is good for us as well. We know in health and social care, many of us have been cared for by immigrants. Many of us have been served by immigrants. The quality of our lives are down to people who have come to this country and who are a part of our nation. It's a way of striking the balance, not using it as a political tool to be populist with no absolute policy behind it and then seen illegal.
The question with respect was about illegal immigration. That's the issue that I was trying to address. And it's quite clear that people are coming from one safe country, France, to the UK. So they're already in a safe country. They're already in a safe country and they are making an illegal journey into the United Kingdom. That's not acceptable.
We need to go further than France. We need to go back to the source of the issue. We need to work our way back. And we should be...
But Llinos, for example, people are coming from Afghanistan.
Yeah.
Realistically, what would Plaid... I appreciate you're not necessarily going for national government, but realistically, what could you do to make it better for women in Afghanistan that they wouldn't want to come here?
So the question is, should we be making a way for them to be safe?
Well, no, what I was asking, you said we need to go back there and try and sort it out. What could you do for women in Afghanistan, realistically?
Well, we've got many from Afghanistan that have come to
safely,
and they've come to safe. And I've got.
But I'm just saying, you're suggesting we go back to the source and try and make it better for them there. Yeah. There's an example. Yeah, what could we do as a nation to make it better for women in Afghanistan?
We could go into that. We could show leadership. We could use. We've got the Human Rights Act. We've got these issues that we can use to try and go into these nations Afghanistan
to change the Taliban's view?
Afghanistan is a one that we have actually got some individuals living in our communities. They've been able to come. We could make a decision that Afghanistan is a country that we can't get to the source, so we will have that safe route for them to come to our country because it's unsafe for them to be there, because we wouldn't want those women to live in the way that they've been forced to live now, not going to education, not giving those opportunities. We could work. There is a different answer for all those different countries.
So it's a safe and legal route you're suggesting?
But I mean, could I just interject? How would you integrate that number of people? I mean, one estimate I read quite recently suggested as many as 800 million people could potentially want to come to the UK. And it's worth mentioning here that actually those often who are most in need are in refugee camps just over the border from countries like Syria and have no hope at all of ever making the journey across Europe and then across the Channel into Britain. The numbers would be absolutely vast, and already we are spending around £5 million a day on asylum hotels. How could our economy, how could our society possibly handle that number of people coming here?
So there's a different answer to every single one of those issues. The £5 million, I agree, it shows that it's just gone out of control. So there are some countries we could go into and we could maybe work in a different way and stop them coming into the country. We could work with other nations and do that. There are some countries where, as you've just mentioned, Afghanistan, but impossible maybe for us to support those women, and we have to bring them into the nation.
Impossible to get the government to change its view, that's what I'm trying to say.
Yeah, it's impossible to do that. But we also know with people are leaving this country as well. So we know that with net migration, it's down. So actually, there is that. They're coming to this country and the net migration is down. But my main concern is that immigration
let's take the year when net migration was 906,000. Only about 200,000 people emigrated that year versus over 1 million who immigrated.
When you use immigrants, when immigrants are used for the reasoning behind the housing issue, the national health issue, the education
But the question is about illegal immigration. Let me bring Mark in, just because you're sitting here very patiently and I know you're desperate to get in. But it's illegal immigration we're talking about, so people crossing the Channel or coming in other ways illegally.
So I'm going to put my cards on the table. Before I retired, I was the General Secretary of the Civil Service Union PCS. It was my union, working with Care for Calais, that funded the stopping of the policy to Rwanda. We stopped the flights on the airport, and it's one of the proudest things we've ever done. The Rwanda policy was inhumanity at its worst. And let's remember a few things. You listen to this conversation and you think we're going to be overrun with 800 million people. Currently, of the EU 27 countries, Britain is 14th in terms of the amount of people who seek asylum in the UK. The fact of the matter is, no politician anymore seems to be, and I admire Llinos, is prepared to say Wales and Britain is the great country it is because of centuries of immigration that brought us cultural enrichment, support in our public services and some of our greatest things. We should be proud of it. My father came to this country from Poland after the Second World War. So all the talk at the moment is negative. We should have some people talking up. I've had 4 life-saving operations. I've had a heart transplant. And the nurses and doctors who saved me came from Africa and Asia and China and from all over the world. And I'm glad they came to this country. Otherwise, they wouldn't be alive. Now, the question we have to ask is this talk about illegal immigration. If people look at the statistics, they will find of the small boat crossings, people whose cases have been assessed, more than half are given leave to stay because it's accepted they have a right to seek asylum in Britain. And the only reason they're getting in dinghies, and 225 have died since 2018, 78 died last year. Let's have some humanity and think of the women and children, people fleeing war and persecution. They shouldn't have to get in a dinghy. And the way to smash the criminal gangs is to do what we are petitioning the Labour government to do. We should have a policy like we had for Ukraine, of a visa policy to come through safe routes where your case can be assessed in a system that isn't underfunded. There's currently over 250,000 backlog cases because the Tory government savaged civil service numbers and cut the Home Office to the bone. As a humane, civilised country, we should accept that if people come here, they should have their case assessed against rules, swiftly and efficiently. And what I think you'll find is an awful lot of them will be given leave to stay, and those people will become part of our communities and our nurses and our doctors and our social workers, and we should be proud of that. And when politics is all expressed through a negative about people fleeing, we should look at a mirror and say to ourselves this simple question I'll finish on. This problem isn't going to go away. With climate change and emergencies, there's going to be huge population shifts in the decades to come. And the idea that we can be Fortress Britain and Fortress Europe is for the birds. We need international cooperation to deal with what are going to be seismic shifts in a mature way that puts humanity at its heart rather than dumbing down to the most reactionary politics imaginable.
Okay. I will take another question. I'm going to do this a little bit differently. This is a topic that comes up, has come up for the last year every time we come to Wales. So I want to take two questions, one straight after the other. Keith Humphreys.
When will the Welsh Labour government, backed by Plaid Cymru, rescind the 20-mile-an-hour speed limit? Wendy
Tebbett, where are you?
Given the 28% reduction in casualties since the introduction of the 20-mile-per-hour speed limit in Wales, should the rest of the country be following suit?
And there you have it, folks. The two opposing opinions that I see in our audience every time we come to Wales in the questions that you submit in the hour or so before we go on air. The 20-mile speed. So in September 2023, Wales became the first nation in the UK to impose a 20-mile-per-hour speed limit on all roads in residential and built-up areas. There was quite some protest against that here in Wales. So in July last year, the Senedd introduced new guidance so that councils could make that decision. And in some cases, the councils have rescinded that and reverted to 30. It's worth pointing out that there are 20-mile-per-hour speed limits in many places across England and Scotland as well. But it's something people feel very strongly about here in Wales. There was someone protesting about it outside this very studio when I arrived. Llinos, this is something that you supported.
Yeah, as a party, we supported this. Obviously, when it came to the detail, and what we've seen in Welsh Government now is that they've changed the detail. I think the second question around the recognition of deaths and safety on roads, and I as a mother of someone that's just started to learn to drive, or is a first-time driver on the road, that actually road safety is something that we should all take care of. And being in a residential area and being in places where people want to walk and be safe is important.
But given what a backlash there was against it, did that make you think, no, maybe this isn't quite the
well,
right
I was a council leader at the time, and what you do agree with it in principle. I think everybody would agree with it in principle, but when the guidance came out, it was quite restrictive, and we were a council leader and we were looking at, and it was restrictive, and hence why they are in some areas you think, well, why is it here? But it was the guidance. Now that they have changed the guidance, we will see that is changing in those areas that we question. But we also know, when you consult on this with communities and ask them, do you want to change it back to 30 in your own community? Everybody says no, because they want it in their own community. And the people that don't want it outside the majority of people want it in 20 and outside their door. But there are areas, industrial areas, there are some areas I think that, and I do think that those changes now and those authorities that have gone out to consult, but it just shows as well a lack of, you need to make sure when you bring in a policy that it's deliverable and that you don't need a U-turn.
Now you're saying that people don't want it in, whenever it's their area, they want to keep it at 20. I should just point out that in Wrexham, for example, more than 50 stretches of road are having their limit raised back to 30 miles an hour because when the council consulted, 93% of people voted in favour of scrapping that limit. So I'm not entirely sure you're right.
Can I ask the question? The only question is, were they people who lived in that community or were they people that commuted through that community?
It was a council consultation. That's all I can tell you. Darren.
Look, the 20-mile-an-hour default speed limit in Wales is absolutely balmy. That's why I voted against it, and so did the Welsh Conservatives in the Senedd, to ignore the views of nearly 460,000 people who signed a petition is arrogant, and it smacks of a party that is taking people in Wales for granted. And I'm afraid that that's the position of the Labour Party. Now, look,
but what about the figures, Darren? Because between October 23 and 24, the number of road casualties fell by 28%. You must welcome that.
So, look, I am in favour of a targeted approach with 20-mile-an-hour speed limits. Let's have 20-mile-an-hour speed limits where it makes sense to have them. Outside schools, children's play areas, in accident hotspots, places where it's absolutely appropriate to reduce the speed limit. But having this approach, which is a default in every community, it's just stupid and it's costing us money. I appreciate that there are casualties which have come down. You'd have no road casualties if you banned cars in Wales, but that's a ridiculous proposition as well. We need a targeted approach, and we need to recognise that actually this is costing our economy, which means we've got less in taxes, that we can invest in our NHS to save lives as a result of the economic hit, which the Welsh Government itself suggested was £9 billion.
Alex, you are gagging to come in. I just want to hear some from our audience, because I say that this is something that people feel pretty strongly about. Man in the grey sweater with the glasses in the middle.
For this to be essentially the headline policy that's coming out of the Senedd, does that not show how little power the Senedd actually have in Wales over their own policies?
Well, there are other things involved as well. Education, health, for example. Yes, man at the back in the check shirt.
Thank you. This sums everything up for me, this whole debate, as we listen to it. For a start, just on the subject of the 20-mile-an-hour speed limit, it was obvious it was going to make people very angry and very frustrated on some sides, and many people passionately wanted it as well. We should have found an efficient way to have proper dialogue, maybe even a short, quick, even a mini referendum, something, because it was people cared so much about it. So we should have done that. But above all else, and I see nodding heads, I can see you there, Darren, nodding your head, you know. Alex, I heard you earlier on talking about free this and free that at the start. Our whole debate around immigration throughout in this previous section. Some very valid points, I thought, by the way, from Llinos and from Mark. We're a compassionate nation here in Wales, but what's happening with the major parties, I think, now, and it frustrates me. In the past, I've been a floating voter, but I see increasingly this system's not working for us, because Wales is a playground for the national parties to fight one another. And the whole debate is on a national, a UK level, not a Welsh level. And I think the focus should be on making Wales the best place it can possibly be, with a strong, vibrant economy and a great education, a great place to live, a health service that we can be proud of, and the energy and the focus is put behind that instead of playing out these politics. And I think Reform are going to be exactly the same as the Tories and Labour, just fighting London's battles. We need to focus on Wales.
Well, we are focusing on Wales with this very question. So let's come back to it. The 20-mile-per-hour speed limit. Alex.
I think it's following the evidence, isn't it? 28% reduction in casualties. They are lives saved. I think we all have examples of where we know someone who has tragically lost their lives on the roads in our communities. The evidence speaks for itself. Where 20 miles an hour is appropriate and it works, it does save lives and it saves money and it saves our NHS.
But given the size of the backlash, it would certainly appear you did not take the people with you.
I think that's part of the problem. If I'm brutally honest, that's part of the problem. We didn't take the people with us. We didn't explain it well enough. We didn't communicate it well enough. Llinos is right. Where people have it in their communities, the vast majority of people actually think it's appropriate on certain types of roads. But it is right that councils do have the power to look at this again, to say whether or not it is appropriate, whether it's proportionate, and that is absolutely right. But the evidence does speak for itself. It saves lives. It works.
Mark.
See, I'm old enough to remember the controversy when compulsory seatbelts were introduced. And now everyone takes for granted you wear a seatbelt, it saves lives. So I've looked at the statistics on this question, and there were 100 fewer serious casualties or deaths in 2024 because of the introduction of the policy. Well, that's quite compelling. And I think anything that saves lives and keeps people safe generally should be welcomed. But I live in Carmarthenshire, where there's not very good public transport and where a lot of people drive. And it is the topic of conversation wherever you go. And I think the problem as a driver, and I have had speeding tickets given by my ex-members in the DVLA, but not for breaking the 20-mile-an-hour limit, I'm happy to say, is that it seemed to be introduced in such a blanket way that people didn't have confidence in it not seeming to make sense. How you went, for no apparent reason, 20, 30, 50, 20, and you couldn't quite work out what was going on. And it seems to me that if what we're now doing is reviewing on the basis of the people who know best in local communities, we should have 20 miles an hour where it saves lives, keeps children safe, and people are just going to have to put up with it in the sense of changes we've made in the past if it saves lives. But it should be done evidence-based, and where it doesn't make sense, it should go.
Annabel.
Well, what I think the backlash speaks to is people understanding that life comes with trade-offs, that we all take risks at the moment we leave the house, and we expect that politicians will make those decisions for us. They will understand the trade-offs for us. And as Darren said earlier, you know, perhaps it will save 10 lives, but if we don't want 10 people to die in car accidents, why not reduce the speed limit to 5 miles an hour? Or better still, why not trap people in their homes? Let's return to the lockdown era. You know, the problem is that this was an expensive policy. It cost £32 million, and I don't think that that includes the cost to businesses for the fact that deliveries are going to take longer and therefore their staff costs are going to go up. I don't think it included the monitoring costs, the costs of magistrates' courts, and that has to be traded off against the benefits of this policy. And I'd just make a wider point, which is I'm very worried about the war on motorists that we now have in this country and how difficult politicians of all stripes seem to be trying to make it for people to get from A to B, forgetting that around 61% of journeys in Britain today are made by car. Forgetting in Wales, for instance, that the majority, around 80% of people who are commuting, do so by car. It simply isn't possible to travel across the country all of the time using public transport. And there doesn't seem to really be an awareness of or an acceptance of that among politicians.
I'm going to squeeze in one last question from Richard Gibbs.
With the increasing conflicts going on at the moment, do we think that the 3% GDP that the Prime Minister is offering on defence is enough?
Right, and of course we've got the American Defence Secretary Pete Hegseth meeting Defence Ministers and Mark Rutte, who's the head of NATO today, talking about 5% and saying, in his opinion, that's where the consensus is going to be, which is a hefty number. Alex?
Look, I think we need to be aware of the threats that we are facing right now. This is a new era and we need to be very aware. I don't think any of us thought we would see war in Europe in our lifetime. We are facing, you know, the biggest potential risk to national security since the Cold War era, and it is right that we put ourselves on that war footing by investing in our defence sector, investing in British jobs in that defence sector, and ensuring that our armed forces, those brave men and women who put themselves on the front line, are at the heart of any strategic defence review, which is what we announced this week.
But the question is do we need to increase the defence budget more than the eventual 3% of GDP?
I think, look, we've made it very clear that we're committed to the 2.5%, which we will be funding through cutting the overseas aid budget and putting it into that strategic defence, because that's where it's necessary right now. But it's also making that commitment to getting to that 3% by the next Parliament and looking to see exactly how we're going to do that. Look, it's not going to be easy, but we're committed to getting there, and then working with international allies, working with NATO to ensure that we have this strategic vision to keep us safe and to keep us strong abroad.
5%?
Like I said, it's going to be difficult. I mean, I'm not going to sit here and speculate on how we're going to get there.
OK. Annabel?
It's going to be extremely difficult. We're going to have to change our economy, our society, from a focus on welfare to one on warfare, and look at the difficulties that Labour have had removing the universal winter fuel payment, in reducing the amount of disability benefit that they're going to be handing to people, despite the fact that actually overall it's still going to increase by £20 billion by 2030. We spend in this country around double servicing the national debt what we spend on defence. We spend £53 billion a year on defence, and we are going to have as a country some very difficult decisions about where we are going to pare back the state in order that we can bring in a 1930s style rearmament, which is clearly necessary. But I'm very tired of politicians endlessly talking, and correctly talking, about how we are living in an increasingly dangerous world, how the axis of authoritarian evil is consolidating, the risk is becoming ever more imminent, and yet they're never willing to match that rhetoric with action. And at some point, that threat will be on our doorstep, and is Britain really going to be prepared?
OK. I want to ask you to be really brief, because I've only got 5 minutes. Llinos.
Yeah, I think that we've heard this week that Keir Starmer, with the defence announcement that the world is in a different place. And when the world is in a different place, we need leadership. We need a government that makes different decisions. Cutting the aid budget isn't one of them. Actually, they make their own financial rules. They could change the financial rules to make sure that they could invest in defence and invest in foreign aid. I think the idea that you have to have one or the other, and actually we need to make sure that we're investing in public services, in education, in all those. We need to, but they come with different financial decisions. You make that decision to borrow more, so at the moment you can have a defence and you can spend on defence, but you can also defending our communities by spending on our public services, on the welfare, and making sure it's not fantasy. If you decided that you were going for a wealth tax, you could bring in £500 million a week into your budget. You can make those decisions and you can actually spend. The defence is paramount now. We know that, and what we need to do is rebuild Wales and rebuild the UK. And I
just point out, obviously, no one can be exactly sure quite how much the wealth tax would raise. And you're talking about £500 million. 3% a year in 2030 spent on defence would require an extra £17 billion, according to the Institute for Fiscal Studies. That's more than the entire current Home Office budget, I should point out. Very briefly, Mark.
Yes, so, of course,
Darren, sorry.
Plaid Cymru would have us out of NATO and scrapping our nuclear deterrent, which would be a disaster for our nation's defence. Look, it's the first duty of any government to defend its citizens. I welcome this increased spending in defence. I think it's long overdue. There should have been, the tap should have been turned on much earlier. But I think there are some mistakes here that Sir Keir Starmer and the Labour government have made. First of all, they've acknowledged to our enemies overseas that we are not ready should a conflict start today. I think that's a mistake.
I mean,
they've also...
I hate to do this. Conservatives were in power for 14 years.
And
the armed forces described as being hollowed out.
I've just made it clear that I think there should have been spending on defence earlier. Of course, there was an increase, but it's been insufficient. The second thing that Sir Keir Starmer has done, which I think is dangerous, is he's surrendered the Chagos Islands, which means that our allies and our strategic influence in the Indo-Pacific has been undermined. And the third thing that he's done, which I think is dreadful, is that he's potentially going to cause a further recruitment crisis for our armed forces by scrapping the laws which protect our Northern Ireland veterans from being prosecuted for defending their country against terrorists.
Mark, you've got about a minute and a half.
So, the world is a dangerous place. We've got Donald Trump in the White House, and that's made it infinitely more dangerous. And so... My answer to this is there'll be a huge demonstration in London on Saturday. I'd urge people to go, and it's under the banner, we actually need welfare, not warfare. Yes. And it's making the case that we need war in this country on poverty, on deprivation, on our crumbling NHS and on our crumbling public services.
So do you think we should not be spending more on defence?
I absolutely believe we should not be committing to 3% GDP. I believe that what this country should be doing is saying to itself, first and foremost, we need to sort out the infrastructure of our country and put money where it's desperately needed, not giving billions of pounds to arms manufacturers who are going to make massive profits, when what leadership really should be about is engaging internationally now, trying to defuse certain situations, not looking the other way, by the way, while the Israelis slaughter 60,000 Palestinians.
So what would you say to Mark? What would you say to NATO? You've got Mark Rutte, the head of NATO, that's engaged with the international partner, saying it's got to be 3%, at least 3%. You think we should just say, sorry, we're not going to do it?
If the cost of 3% of GDP is attacking pensioners, not building homes and having a crumbling NHS, we absolutely shouldn't be committing to 3%. Okay. It's about the type of society we want to live in, and we need to sort out our crumbling infrastructure, not make a very quick dash to billions of pounds. And isn't it telling that Keir Starmer could tell us exactly how many submarines we needed, but he can't tell us which pensioners and when are going to get their winter fuel payment.
That money is going to have steel sector, jobs in our economy.
Forgive me, Alex, because we are out of time. Well, there will be a big meeting of NATO in just a few weeks' time, and I suspect we will revisit this subject. So thank you very much for discussing it for now. That is the end of our time here in Llandudno. We are out of time, I'm afraid. Before I say goodbye, let me just remind you, Fleetwood next week, and the week after that, Greenford in West London for our special programme looking at the challenges of growing up in the 21st century. Do apply if you'd like to be in the audience. But for tonight, thank you to the panel, thank you to our audience, and thank you, as always, at home for watching. From Llandudno, bye-bye.
Find your morning